Guys, I wanted to do a video about how to win more solo matches. I know when I first started playing, I struggled a lot with the mechanics in the game as well as the strategy, so I ended up losing a lot of solo matches. I could find my way into the top 10, but then I would often get third-partied or I just didn't know how to play the final fights. So after spending a couple hundred hours in the game, something finally clicked. I think I got a lot better mechanically, but then also learned how to position myself and how to take those final fights wisely. So I wanted to do a video to kind of share some of the strategies that I use to help me get wins in solo games whenever I'm playing. So let's jump into it. Okay guys, so the first thing that you need to think about when you're playing a solo game that you want to win is where you're going to drop. I try and find a location that's not going to be too hot. A spot that's going to have some chests and a place where I can get looted up without having to worry about getting third-partied. There are many scenarios in the early game where if someone finds a better weapon than you can lose your first or second fight just simply out of bad RNG. So I try and find a location where there's not going to be too many people and I can make sure that I can get a slug or a revolver or one of the better starting weapons so I have a better chance of winning my fights. The strategy here is really just to acquire enough resources and make sure that you have as many health pots as you need and as many weapons as you need before you engage an enemy. So this will give you a better chance of survival as well as a better chance of getting your first forge off. In an ideal early game, I get looted up, I get some health pots, maybe a couple armor pots, and then look for 1 or 2 fights so that I can get enough shards to get my first forge. In this particular game, I was pretty fortunate. I was able to get a slug out of my first chest and then pick up 2 quick kills. I heard someone fighting over here, so ran on over to third party and was able to clean up the fight pretty easily. There also was a purple revolver laying around that I picked up, which is a great starting weapon for the hunter. It pairs really well with the longbow, so you'll see me pick that up here. So this is an ideal start. I get all the shards that I need, all the health pots I need. And so from here I try and head on over to the forge and get some of my class weapons made. After the early game, you really want to try and forge as quick as possible. You've picked up some kills, you have all the shards you need, and if you can get a really quick forge off in the beginning of the game, it can kind of help you snowball the rest of the game a little bit. If you can get that legendary or that epic class weapon before another player, if you run into them, you're definitely going to have an advantage in the fight. So I try and always focus on getting my weapon first, and then if I have the shards, I make a movement ability on Hunter and then some armor pots. I think there's different strategies you can use here depending on which class you're playing, but most of the time it's almost guaranteed that you're going to want to pick up a weapon first, and then either a movement ability or an ability. Armor pots are also a really good option if you have the shards. They can double your health pool essentially, so that definitely gives you an advantage in these fights. Again, my strategy here is to try and rotate to forges that aren't heavily populated. I tend to stick to forges on the outside of the map instead of picking hot locations like Crossing or Lumber or Jade or Fungal Forest. Your first forge is by far the most important forge that you'll do all game, so trying to make it safely without being in fear of someone coming in and stealing your loot or killing you is the strategy that I have found the most success with. So play passive, play safe, and maintain your resources so you're set up for success in the late game. At this point in the game, you'll notice that I have 4 kills and have been able to get my entire first forge off. You don't have to get this many kills in order to find success. Kills are by far the most efficient way to gather shards, but it's perfectly fine for you to just run around and loot and just enchant items as well. My goal at the first forge is to always get my entire full loadout, but if you're not finding yourself in that position, then it's okay to just loot as much as you can and then rotate to another forge. Okay, so now that we have obtained our full loadout, we're going to rotate to a second forge. Along the way, we'll be keeping an eye out for low-risk goblins and airdrops. These are objectives on the map that are a great resource for good loot as well as guaranteed runes. So these are objectives that we really want to contest. These can also be a great resource for players who are maybe a bit behind. If you had a slow early game or you weren't able to get a great first forge, but you can take a free airdrop or a free goblin, then they can definitely help you get caught up. In this particular game, there didn't appear to be any nearby objectives, so I just focused on rotating to the second closest forge. The second circle here was pretty aggressive, so I knew that I needed to try and get another quick forge off. Rotations and paying attention to how close you are to the circle is really important. There have been many games where I lose all my armor simply because I get caught out fighting multiple people and then get gatekept, or I just straight up get caught out in the forge. So this can be really detrimental to you winning the game, so always try to prioritize your positioning over obtaining more kills. Okay, so now we've officially hit the midpoint in the game. Roughly a third of the lobby is left, and by this point it's safe for us to assume that all the good players left in the lobby will have a decent loadout. So our goal at this point in the game is really just to collect as many armor pots and runes as we possibly can. Runes and armor are by far the most impactful items when it comes to late game fights, so we want to try and get as many as possible. Most of the time, if the circle allows, I will try to aim for at least 3 forges in a match. The last 2 are primarily focused on armor pots and runes. However, if you find yourself getting pushed off of forges in the mid game, just continue to loot chests and try and find those goblins and airdrops. I think in this game alone, I was able to loot 4 out of my 6 runes from standard chests alone. And then I even had to disenchant a few more that I found later on. So just continue to find ways to improve your loadout so that you can win those late game fights. Okay, so at this point in the game, we got some runes, we got some armor, and we have a really good loadout. So instead of trying to push a third forge, I take a look at the map and just decide that it's best to try and stay along the outskirts and just look for maybe some additional armor pots and just camp an isolated area. So I'm going to go ahead and speed some of this up because it gets a little bit boring. But the idea here is just to try and conserve our resources throughout the rest of the game. We really don't want to fight at this point because we want to save all of our armor for the late game. I know that playing passive and staying away from all the action isn't necessarily the most fun way to play, but again, the goal of this game is to win, not obtain the most kills that we can. And so currently the way that the game is structured, fighting in the mid game really just weakens you and puts you in a worse situation than what you were in. So finding weapons and armor from another player that we kill has just a really low chance of happening. So the best thing that we can do in this scenario is really just to play the zone. My strategies for playing the zone is to try and find a safe place on the edge of the zone and keep our enemies in front of us. This way you know what's behind you and where the other players are going to be. Some of the best spots are behind large rocks, getting high ground on a hill, or camping in a building. Depending on how many players are left, you really just want to wait and only take fights if it's absolutely necessary and plays to your advantage. Now that we have made it to the final 10 players, during this part of the game, I'm safely looting chests to try and find more armor pots, but I'm also listening for where players are and trying to gather as much information on them as possible. I see in the kill feed that there is a player with a fire throwing axe, most likely a warrior, So I know that I don't want to let the circle get too small and have to face him and possibly others in a confined space. So this kind of information is really helpful because it'll let you know when you need to leave your camping spot and start trying to pick off a few of the other players left. As a general rule of thumb, warriors and mages will have a strong advantage in small confined spaces, so always keep in mind your class's strengths. I was playing Hunter this game, so I knew if I was able to safely poke at the remaining players from a distance, I could lower their armor and would have a better chance of winning the fight in the final circle. Okay, so we made it to the final two players. Our strategy really worked in our favor here. We let everyone else kill each other off, and we were able to save all of our armor for this final fight. The zone is really still large enough that we can keep our distance, so the strategy here is to try and just keep an eye out for this last player and try to land some poke damage on him before he finds us. This player makes an interesting play here by using his soar to fly up on top of this snake tower, which I honestly didn't even know was in the game. I think this is an interesting play because I know that he has a fire throwing axe, so I'm surprised that he isn't trying to push me or use that to his advantage. I used to get really nervous in these final fights and would often get impatient or just frantically make a mistake. But this game is a perfect example of just trying to keep your wits and playing to your advantages. I know that he has little to no armor left, so instead of trying to chase him up this tower and put myself in a vulnerable position, it's just better to be patient and wait for zone to push him out. These final fights are really all about playing smart and staying relaxed and just letting your mechanics take over. I've found that the more you win, the more relaxed you will get in these final fights, and it'll just become second nature to you. I know this isn't the most exciting game, but we end up getting the W here, and this is the game that I wanted to use for this video because I think it's a great example of how to control the pace in the late game while putting yourself in the best position for the win. So these are the strategies that I use to make sure that I perform better when I'm playing solo games. Again, these are strategies I use to win, not necessarily to get the most kills. But let me know if you have any tips that you found to help you win more solo games that I didn't mention. I'd love to hear about that in the comments section. And if you enjoyed this content, make sure to follow me on Twitch, Twitter, and subscribe here on YouTube for more updates. Thanks so much for watching. I'll catch you next time.